Hi, this is BioEnchanted, and today I want to talk about my trip that I just took to Kew Gardens, which was quite fun. I've been wanting to make that trip for a long time, and I've finally done it. So I figured I'd make a video showing off some of the photos I'd taken, and some videos as well, but also just describing my time there. The first thing I noticed while I was there was that the trains are exhausting to deal with in London. I've included a small diagram here to show what I mean for just one particular station. In this case, this is a diagram of St. Pancras. But the general idea is there are actually multiple layers of trains in London, not just the underground and the overground, but even in the overground you have trains that go to different layers of different train stations that all go to different places. Like there's a circuit of trains that go around London's kind of perimeter, and then there's a bunch of smaller trains that actually go to terminating stations. It's quite very different to intercity trains, which is what I'm used to. So in this diagram, you'll see I've made a little diagram there. The surface trains is where I initially came in when I first got to London, and when I first got to St. Pancras, and then I had to go down an escalator, which is that red thing on the right, on the left, down to that mall area, and then from the mall area, that's when you go further down. And the next couple of layers I kind of described in such a way because as you go further down these layers, it gets a little bit scarier than the time before, because the surface trains are just normal trains you're used to. And it's kind of like if Sheffield Supertram was kind of like a tutorial level and the intercity trains are the main game, London's kind of the final boss, because not only do you have multiple different layers to certain train stations like this one, you also have quite a lot of you have other different, completely separate circuits that kind of go to different places as well. Like at one point I was at this one station and the instructions said to get on the same station onto a train going somewhere different, but it turned out it wasn't exactly the same station, it was just named the same. It turns out I had to go to what's called a Thameslink station, which is a completely separate station to the circuiting trains. Like, they don't even go to the same station, they're completely separate stations on completely separate rail lines, which is quite confusing when you're only used to each city being covered by a single central rail that connects all the cities together. London is so much more confusing. And there's a rather funny little thing with the reason I've named the room the way they are. The one just below the mall area, which is where I was coming back from, caused a little bit of confusion. I've called that Midgar, because that's not quite the underground. It's still kind of, it's just more intense than the above-ground trains, because it's all just kind of like tunnels where the trains go, and it's very dark down there. But it's also like you only have the one tunnel, and they have these little connection mezzanines. This is what that little platform is halfway down towards Midgar on the map that I've drawn. That's kind of the connecting parts to go to other parts of the station, other platforms and things. But that's why I described that as Midgar, because it's not quite the actual tube. Because the tube itself is very different, because the tube is what I'd call the most primal of all the trains. In that, all the other trains in the UK feel like they were built for human use, because they just stop at certain stations and give you plenty of time to get on and off and get seated and everything like that, and they're just generally quite organised. And then the tube is just so complicated, and this trains barely stop for just about a minute to get on and off. It's ridiculous. But also, because of the way the windows are open, the tube is constantly kind of screaming as it moves forward, because the air is being forced through all the carriages. And it's also got a rule that other trains in the UK don't have, like with the Supertram and Sheffield and the intercity rail rather. You can kind of just travel between the carriages on a train and it's fine, because they have these kind of rubber things connecting all the carriages together, all these little sets of doors. But the underground isn't like that. The underground actually has a message on each door that basically says, if you try and cross between the carriages while it's moving, you'll likely die. So this is why I kind of describe the worm, as I like to call it, because it's sort of like the tube is kind of a fun way forward, because both tube and underground give it a very kind of interesting vibe, because they both make it sound like something that shouldn't be used. Like the London Underground makes it sound like a sort of hell, or it makes it sound kind of like an underworld sort of area. And then the other name for it, the tube, makes it sound like a creature that was found that we just started using for transport. Like it wasn't supposed to be used like for humans, like Midgar and the surface trains are. We just started jumping on it, and it started yelling at us to get off, hence the fact that it screams as you go through the tube. I only had to use it the once, though. It's quite intense compared to other trains I've used, so I found that quite funny. But that's kind of just the my way down there, and also caused a few complications on the way back, because at one point on the way back home, I was dropped off at Midgar by the station, by the Thameslink train, but I didn't realise that it was a completely separate part of the station to the surface train, so I had to end up rushing all the way up to the mall area. Because between the surface trains and Midgar, there's basically like a whole area that's not even part of the train station. It's kind of like a little mall area between the train stations, where you can do some shopping if you're waiting for trains and things. So that just adds a whole new layer where it's like it goes from train to mall to train. It's very, very different to what I expected from other train stations, which are generally much smaller and only have like sparse shops and coffee shops. There's kind of occasionally one or two in the whole station, because normally most of them only have like a single layer of platforms, and then they have like a footbridge over them or a little tunnel underneath them to get to the different platforms without having to literally cross the tracks, and that's kind of as far as the 3D-ness gets. So that's why the whole like how 3D St. Pancras got really threw me off. When I got there and checked into the hotel, and I'll check my luggage into the hotel anyway, that's when I started taking actual photos, because that's when I got to the actual gardens themselves, which is my actual purpose for the visit. So the first photo I've got here is there's a series of sculptures around the area by particular artists called the 12 somethings of light. It's like an exhibition, I've forgotten exactly what it's called, but it's quite interesting. There's all kinds of steel sculptures that you can see that are sort of like the one I'm showing here of this sort of flower. And then this next one is a temple. There's a few temples around the area that are kind of built of the same structure, have a little bench there to rest in. In this case, this one was a temple of Bellona, who is kind of the sister god of Ares, if I remember the thing correctly. Or Jupiter, whichever. I think it's Greek, so I think it would be Ares. And then the next photo I took further along, because this is all me going kind of down through what the gardens call the Camellia Walk, which is sort of just immediately to the left as you enter the gardens, and it's kind of just along the south wall of the gardens. On the Camellia Walk, you get this ruined archway that's pretty cool, and from the front of the archway I didn't actually see the other side of it until I went through it and saw these cool statues on the other side of it, these little carvings that are quite neat on the other side. It's quite a cool ruined arch. I don't know what its purpose was initially, but it's just cool to see, because of the way you kind of don't see the art until you're on the other side of it, which is quite fun. And the reason I was exploring the western side on the first day, because I was there for 2 days to give myself plenty of time to enjoy it and not have to feel rushed. This centerpiece you see me approaching in these next few photos is called the Great Pagoda. I was deliberately staying near the Great Pagoda so that I could keep to a time slot I had to actually climb it, which was later in the day, about 2 p.m. So I was keeping around the western side so I'd not have to rush too far to get to the Great Pagoda when I needed to actually climb it. And then this next picture, this red orchid, is basically, it's like another thing by that same artist as the steel orchid from earlier, but this one is kind of made out of car metal and the same kind of paint they use on cars, which is quite an interesting juxtaposition. And I just quite liked the how striking it was because of how red it is and everything. And on the way there, because we were in kind of like a Japanese themed area with the pagoda and everything, is also this Japanese gate that's in the area as well. That's quite cool. I've got a couple of photos of, and the rock garden that surrounds it. And there's a few little photos and some videos of like planes that I took going over as well, because one thing I didn't realise when I was booking the holiday is just how close Kew Gardens is to an airport. So there's a lot of low-flying planes going over you, which is quite funny, because when you go to certain upper areas, I kind of use this as a bit of a joke sometimes, where like it almost felt like you could get high enough to almost touch the planes, which is of course me being silly, but yeah. And then these next two areas are in the temperate house, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of a rather big greenhouse. That's kind of not quite the biggest one on the campus. There's a few that have a bigger footprint, but this particular greenhouse is quite nice. It's just a bunch of different types of plants from around the world that I took a couple of photos of, this one starting kind of near the bottom, and then he ascended this large staircase to get to the balcony and take a few photos from the balcony, which I thought were quite striking, showing the size of the greenhouse itself, the temperate house. And then I had a few close-ups of some specific plants that I quite liked, with like the different colours they had and the different kinds of like trunks and that sort of thing. And I quite like this one banana-style plant where, like, and I say banana-style because it's got a similar pseudo-stem, where like the way the stem peels away, given that it's the outer layers of leaves rotting so the inner layers can come out, is almost like a kind of plant that fertilizes itself, because it kind of drops the leaves off, then they just rot on the ground where it is, which I thought was quite poetic and kind of interesting. And I quite like the photos I took in here, especially of the strikingly red flowers as well. Oh, there's some quite cool like spiky trees over here that I quite liked, that I got some photos of around the Mediterranean garden, which has some quite interesting plants too. And then these couple of ducks that were just chilling. There's quite a few like birds hanging out in the gardens, because there's a few ponds there and everything as well. And there's also this quite a cool shot I took of the ladders on the outside of another greenhouse. It's different, called the Palmer House, which is actually probably the reason I wanted to come to this place in the first place, because the Palmer House is actually where the level in Medieval 2 is based, that's based on Kew Gardens. It's actually based in and around the Palmer House. So that was part of the reason I actually wanted to come there, because I'd actually seen it in Medieval 2. Because I'm a giant duck. And before that I didn't even know the place existed. And there's also this rather cool cottage that was that was it. It was Queen Charlotte's cottage that was this particular building. I quite like the look of, but it wasn't open, because the Queen Charlotte's cottage is only open on certain days. And I quite like this photo I took here, because this photo is actually of quite an interesting thing. It's kind of like a stag beetle breeding ground, where they stack some logs together so that the rotting logs can form a nice habitats for like stag beetles. I think it's stag, it might have been rhino. I'm pretty certain it was stag, I can't remember exactly though, but either way it's quite a cool little area. Just to see like the kind of habitats they build in certain locations for certain types of insects to flourish. I also want to mention the hive as well, which is pretty cool. It's basically a huge installation that I went to on day 2 and got a video of, where the whole idea of it is they have a physical beehive elsewhere in the garden that you can't really access, because you don't really want the general public accessing a beehive. That would be quite dangerous, both for the bees and the public. But like, it's elsewhere. What they've done is they've actually equipped the beehive with a accelerometer, so they can measure the vibrations that come from it, because bees communicate by vibration. And what they've done is they've built this huge structure that mimics the shape of the hive, and equipped it with a bunch of little light bulbs and speakers, so as you're in the structure you can actually hear the buzzing sound that mimics the vibrations that the bees are making throughout the hive, and the lights kind of flickering on and off to show where the signals are being transmitted to. So it's kind of like seeing a huge like electrical thing, just kind of showing how the bees are communicating, where the communication is coming and going, which I've included a small video of here, because I thought that was really cool. It's quite a lot harder to hear though than it was in person, because when you're there in person, your brain kind of filters out all the tourists talking. You can just focus on the sound the hive itself is making. The same with the following little video of the insects in the grass that I tried to take as well, that also is almost completely overshadowed by the people talking, but not quite, so I've included that too. I also had a few little photos and videos just showing like different types of trees that I quite like the look of, and how tall the trees got. So this is one video I saw sweeping up and down one tree. And sometimes I just got a photo because I quite liked how clusters of berries or flowers looked. And then finally I got to actually climbing the pagoda, which is quite cool. This is like what these next few photos are, is from the top of the pagoda, which is quite big because it's 9 stories tall, about 200 steps on a very increasingly tight spiral staircase. It was quite a challenging climb, but I'm glad I did it, and it was nice to have these big shots of like the entire grounds from really high up. That was pretty cool. And then there's this little photo I took of this little kind of a square cut out of the floor, because they actually used the lower layers of the pagoda to test smoke-related things for World War II. So those little, like that little glass panel you see in the floor is where they cut out the hole to do the smoke testing thing. And there's a couple of cool little models that have these little kind of cranks that you can turn and make the models like animate, and that's quite fun as well. And I also like these little photos I took of the water lily pond and a few specific trees where like there was a lot of pine cones in those trees, and I just wanted to get some good shots of the pine cones. But I quite like the lighting in the water lily pond. I think I did that quite nicely. And there's also around here, as I also took this video that I'm showing shortly, of the sprinkler system kind of panning between an area, because I quite like the way the water fell between the branches of the trees in that area. I thought that was quite cool, so I've got a little photo of that to kind of capture that moment. And of course, everything in the next few photos, everything has to have a platforming level. So that's what these next few photos are, is me showing off this rather interesting little log trail that's designed for like children to kind of play on and try and balance on and stuff like that. And I went around some of it, and I was able to balance on some of it, but not all of it, because some of it's quite difficult. But it's quite cool to see like these different photos of like the different ways the logs are carved to make them look like dragons and snakes and stuff. That was quite fun. And also just to get an idea of like different levels of difficulty, because there's some really easy places where there's quite low logs and there's very obvious steps, and some much harder ones as well, with the log stock kind of like wrapping between each other. And there's also this little horrible histories tour that was going on, so we've got a photo of one of the little speakers there describing honey fungus, so it was quite interesting for like any children visiting. There's also like other little performances that happened in the gardens. Like one that was advertised was a Wind in the Willows thing and a Midsummer Night's Dream, but those weren't currently happening at the time I went. And then I quite like this next area. I got these couple of photos of essentially it's a botanical nursery. It's where they experiment to help flowers start to germinate and different plants start to germinate in different environments, so that they can then safely plant them in other parts of the gardens and actually have them flourish in the wild-ish. I say wild-ish because obviously it's not wild, it's kind of a simulated wildlife. But I quite like this little place with like, I can only go into these 2 rooms because of course it's a sealed environment so that the plants can grow at their most efficient and be tended to by specific botanists that know what they're doing. But it's cool to get a couple of shots of the outside and the inside of that area to get a shot of the plants starting to be germinated. And there's also a pretty cool area that I did towards the end of that first day, which was the treetop walk, which I'm getting a few photos of now, just showing some of the western area from the upper area, and showing one of the plaques on the walk as well, because there's a bunch of plaques on the walk to give little kind of poetic descriptions of how nature works and everything like that. And there's a shot I got of like between the grating, just to give an idea of how sheer it can be from how high up we are. And then like another photo of the temperate house, which is the place we just were, from the top of the things. That was quite cool to see as well, just seeing how much smaller it looked from that far away. Then it's got a few basic photos of the hotel room I stayed, because it was actually the only room in the whole hotel that had a balcony, so I was quite happy taking a little photo of the balcony. And then just a couple of random photos of like the main room and the bathroom, just to kind of show off the hotel room, and then the hotel itself, because I know everyone's probably curious, because hotels are kind of fun to compare and contrast and things, although I've never really used them very often. It was a nice enough hotel, but it was like a breakfast the next morning and stuff, and it was pretty okay. I only need to be there for the one day though, so. And then there's a few little shots on the next day of me going to the east of the garden, because I wanted to see because the first day I sort of focused on the west side of the garden, and then on the second part of the day I wanted to go to the eastern side to see what happened there. There's some quite interesting things, like I got some shots of this little pond outside of the farmhouse, and then a shot of the front of the farmhouse showing the main entrance, and a couple of shots of the ponds from inside, which I thought were quite cool. And then there's quite a striking flower bed that was just outside the next place I went to, which is the water lily house, which, unlike the water lily pond, because as you could see in the photo, it was currently, the doors were closed, but it was still open for business, just the doors were closed to keep the temperature going. It was boiling in there, and these next few photos show the interior of it. I quite like how saturated green it is because of how, just how the plants just look in that environment. And also quite like all these gigantic Victoria Amazonia plants, or Amazonia Victoria, I can't remember which way around it goes, but I quite like the way I framed them with the red flower in the centre of the shot as well. And then some other shots of them showing different angles of them through the smaller lily ponds in the area as well, in the corners. And then one last shot showing a further out view of the thing with the red flowers more central, because I thought that was quite a cool visual. And the next couple of shots show a couple of little areas in what they called the evolution garden, which I thought was quite interesting, because the way it was laid out, it was basically laid out like a tree of evolution. So you kind of as you were going further back, you were going further and further back in time. So going from one layer that was Rosids and Astrids, that was the names of them, which were more recent plants, and it kind of went back a few 100,000 years to ferns and other non-flowering plants. There's one other funny thing there that I didn't get a photo of, but I thought it was quite funny, because it looked like the flowering part of the plant was kind of going right in the face of one of the ferns, like it was making fun of it, being all look, I can flower, you can't. Which I thought was quite funny. Although I didn't get a photo of it, because I don't get a photo of everything, I just got some photos of some specific things that I quite liked. And then there's a little interior and exterior shot of the bonsai treehouse, which is a little greenhouse with a few little bonsai trees. I didn't get many shots from inside because it's quite a small space. You have to be quite careful not to actually touch the bonsai plants because they're quite carefully controlled. So I was taking photos mostly from the outside just for preservation. And then there's next few photos of a rather cool rock garden, which I quite like because there's a lot of quite hardy plants there and some quite interesting colours from there, because the hardier plants are of course much duller in colour, but in a very striking way, in that it goes from green to kind of silver. And there's quite a lot of browns and yellows there, and it's quite a cool looking garden. I've got some shots from above where the path loops underneath it, and I quite like that whole area. And then there's a smaller sort of a cliffside sort of a greenhouse, which showed some of the more dazzling plants that I took a little photo of here, because I quite liked how the ran the gamut between the fluffier plants on the left and then the more traditional flowers on the right. I thought that was quite interesting. And some other photos of some of the more arid plants in that area too. And then these next few photos were in an insanely not quite as hot as the lily ponds house, the water lily house rather, but it was still quite warm because these next two areas are in the Princess of Wales Conservatory, which is the arid and tropical area where the temperature control is much more careful. So there's all these doors that are keep them closed as you come through them. They kind of act as an airlock, where they kind of ask you to close the doors behind you to make sure it keeps the temperature in each area consistent. And so I kind of accidentally went into this area backwards and was going backwards through it from the hotter and wetter areas to the drier places. But something I've noticed was you can really tell how effectively water kind of conducts heat, because in the middle areas it was quite warm, but you went up one tiny staircase and suddenly it was absolutely boiling after a 3-foot staircase. And then another 3-foot staircase was a little bit further down, and suddenly it's freezing cold, or much cooler, not quite freezing cold, because that takes you in the underwater area. And it really kind of shows how well water conducts heat. There was that much of a temperature difference in that small distance. Because also the farmhouse had a similar thing, although they didn't go up the stairs there. They did have a staircase, but they had a warning on it saying at the top of this really tall staircase, it will be above 35 degrees C. So make sure you are properly equipped for it, properly dressed for it, otherwise you will probably die of heat stroke. So yeah, that's why I was glad I only went up the stairs in that smaller area, where it was much less of a upward journey to get there. But I got some pretty cool photos of some of the plants there. And then I quite liked some of the cacti I got in the arid area, which was a lot cooler. I also got a couple of photos as well of this one area with similar Amazonian Victorias that had a bunch of fish swimming around. So I got some video from above the pond where you can see the fish kind of swimming between the lilies. Although you can only see the two really big, I think they were meant to be carp. I don't really know. I don't know my fish very well. But then I also went to the little underwater area and got photos with a little window at the actual inside of the pond itself. There we go. And that window shows a lot more fish than you can see from the surface. There's hundreds of them. I've got another little photo here showing those. I was quite happy with those videos because they really show the variety of fish that are in there. And how they don't just kind of have a single thing. They have kind of like, they don't just have a single plant growing somewhere. They have like entire ecosystems designed to help support those plants. And that's quite cool. And then this next area, it was the Kew Palace, which I only got a single photo of because you only really can get photos from the outside. Because while they can go inside and look around and stuff, they do ask to not take photographs inside because there's a lot of like historical documents in there from King George III, I think, that sort of thing. That was where he lived for most of his life. And of course, he has not to take any videos in there either, so just following common courtesy. But it's a very striking palace with how red it is. I quite like the structure of the building and things. Another pretty cool thing to see while I was there was the ice house, which is where they used to keep food cool to avoid it going off before refrigeration existed. Which I've also attached a little video here of just me showing off with my phone camera the structure of the place because it was just a bit too cumbersome to do in photos. So I figured a photo sweeping up and down would be more effective. No, video would be more effective. And then this next shot was just of the Sion Outlook, which is essentially a little place where it shows the river that goes by Kew Gardens. So you just get I've got a nice shot of the river by the benches there. And another nice little shot of all these like clustered berries. And then I was getting a little bit tired of Kew Gardens itself, and because I still had like half a day left before the trains came to get me home, I actually decided to take a look at something that I would not have been able to take a look at if I hadn't been there on my own, because it was the kind of place only I'd really been interested in. And anyone else who was there would have had to drag their kicking and screaming, which was the National Archives. Because I was curious, because ever since I saw on the map that it was actually quite close to the gardens, so I just wandered down there to take a look. I got a couple of shots with a pretty cool building. Although, I mean, as I found out when you go inside, it's the kind of building that while you can visit, you can only really use it if you're there for a very specific purpose, because it's not like a normal library where you can just kind of look around and see what they have on shelves and stuff. Because it's an archive of original documents and things related to English history, it's only got the surviving documents that exist, and the oldest documents they have it goes as far back as about 1066. It's got like the the Doomsday Book. That's the oldest document they have, and they actually have a little copy of the Doomsday Book. There's like a little display copy that's laid out by one of the central library floors. It's quite cool to flip through. And you have a little cafeteria on the bottom layer as well, so you can kind of just go in to visit, but it's the sort of place where you can't really make very good use of it if you don't have a specific document you're looking for that you can request and book ahead of time. But it was cool to see the building itself though and how big it was and get an idea of the place. Then I went back to the gardens, got a few extra little pictures of some plants I quite liked, and this cool little picture of some geese on the lake that I quite liked as well from the lake outlook, like the lake crossing. And then there's the last couple of photos. This last one is kind of like this interesting little Japanese farmhouse in the bamboo garden. I didn't get many shots of the bamboo garden, but it was quite nice to look around. And it was quite an interesting thing to go inside the Japanese farmhouse because the farmhouse is actually really dark inside. So you can kind of barely see while you're in there, but you can see there's a few displays in there. It's just there's no lighting in there because they don't want to mess with putting electric lighting in that kind of structure to avoid causing damage and things. But that was my visit to Kew Gardens. I just wanted to talk about that because I was quite excited to finally get to go there and take a look around and get an idea of the whole place and see what it was actually like after briefly seeing a small glimpse of it in a video game. I'm glad I gave it 2 days as well because that turned out to be the perfect amount of time to just explore and enjoy the full place without feeling rushed. So I quite enjoyed that, and I'll be going back to my normal videos soon. I just wanted to update you on that and let you know about my cool holiday. Goodbye. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check out my Patreon as well. Speaking of, thank you to James Rossi for supporting me on Patreon.